Hello everyone, sorry, just adjusting the camera there. I am still in a pleasant suburban backyard, but this time it's a friend of mine and I'm house sitting for him. If you hear a chicken, there are chickens around. Suburban chickens are kind of a thing these days, and these ones are strictly pets. There are 4 of them out in the yard here. All right, so this is 1921, the 18th of January. Oi, this one is causing me a bit of stress because so many people we need to talk about. Relatively short diary entry, but it's just full of people. So Dimitri is on the social scene. And it also includes a racial slur, and we'll talk about that, in this instance applying to Jewish people, and it's the word that the word Yiddish is derived from. So I guess it's a slur. I guess so. I mean, Yiddish, the word obviously isn't a slur, but anyway, we will talk about that. So I will read the diary entry and then afterwards do the introductions to people who aren't, whom we haven't met yet. All right, 18th January 1921, Tuesday. Mordvinov turned up in the morning. I forgot to say that this is another one that is a summary. So most of it is my writing and then with some quotes from Dimitri. So on that Tuesday, Mordvinov turned up in the morning and he wanted to talk to Dimitri about, in quotes, his plan concerning various Russian businessmen to whom he wishes to introduce me. He also tried to prove to me that he is in touch with several Jews. But I had heard that one before and so was very cautious. So that's the end of the quote. And then afterwards, he goes to St. Cloud to play golf. I'm not sure with who, maybe with whom. Maybe he just went by himself. But he wasn't able to do that because it started raining. So he went back to Paris. And he got back around tea time, and he stopped in to see Countess Mordvinova, the wife of the man he'd talked to in the morning. All right, Michel Murat was there, and this so Dimitri ended up staying quite a while, longer than he'd intended. And then he and Murat went together to have cocktails with, lo and behold, Contessa Martel. And her 2 brothers were with her, as were Martha de Velly, Antoine de la Salle, and Henri Say. So that evening he dined at the Ritz at the invitation of Sturgis. And there was a woman there whose name, unfortunately, I can't make out, but Dimitri describes her as the sister of Eileen and Dickie Ward, whom I know from Scotland. That's him saying, whom I know from Scotland, and him saying it was pretty dull. So the dinner was pretty dull. Everyone started dancing, but Dimitri was, in his words, completely fed up, and he decided to leave. So from there, he went to Maria's place and found her with the Polovtsovs, and the 4 of them tried to tell their fortunes by pouring hot wax in water, but Dimitri says nothing came of it. Okay, so that's it for the diary entry itself, but so many people, lots to talk about. So let's start with Mordvinov. And usually Dimitri was at home, so to speak, in the morning. So people could come in his flat and he would be there in the morning, usually doing his writing, but also willing to see anybody who happened to come by. And usually it was Russians, and usually the Russians were coming to talk about one of two things. Either they were coming there to talk about the political situation, or they were coming there to talk about Dimitri's financial situation, because he'd put feelers out everywhere with everyone who had any significant connections about what he wanted. I'm all thumbs today, sorry about that. So he'd put feelers out about any chance that he could get loans from people or some kind of sinecure job that he could get, and various people were eager to help him. But by this point, he'd tried multiple times, and he'd had multiple people tell him, oh yeah, it's a sure thing, I'll talk to so-and-so millionaire, and it's a sure thing. And it had never panned out. So apparently Mordvinov was one of the people who was trying to help him with that. But Dmitri at this point is very skeptical. So Mordvinov says that he has connections with various Russian businessmen and also with several Jews. So, you know, the stereotype of Jewish bankers and businessmen. And yeah, so anti-Semitism was endemic in Imperial Russia. And it was something Dmitri would have been exposed to from the time he was a little boy. Although it's funny, he mentions, as perhaps you know, in one of his 1906 diary entries, that his cousin, what was it, Ioan Konstantinovich, didn't know this particular racial slur that Dmitri uses. But, you know, I'm not going to sugarcoat things. Dmitri was what I would call sort of a casual anti-Semite. So he had friends who were Jews. He would go to dinner parties at their houses, and, you know, friends that were Jews that he wasn't having ulterior motives with. And, you know, so that was fine as far as it went. But yeah, I mean, you know, it is what it is, unfortunately. All right. So he goes and tries to play golf, doesn't work out. And then at 5 o'clock, well, I don't know if the Count was with him at that point, but he stops to see the Countess Mordvinova. I forgot to introduce Count Mordvinov himself. So his name was Alexander Alexandrovich. He was Dmitri's age, and he was actually quite an interesting person. His great passion in life was motorsport and mechanics, and he actually had set the speed record in Russia driving an Opel. And he was involved, you know, his whole life with motorsport and racing. And Dmitri was not, you know, he liked it, but he wasn't passionate ever about motorsport. And in fact, maybe he had a sense that someday his wife would jilt him and divorce him because she fell in love with a race car driver. But maybe premonition was the word I was looking for. But anyway, this Mordvinov in 1914, when the war broke out, he actually joined the French Foreign Legion. He was Russian, of course. And then later that year, toward the end of 1914, he went to Russia, where he was asked to go back to France as a Russian representative, of the Russian army in France, helping to facilitate the production of special aircraft engine parts. And then after the war, he returned to the Foreign Legion, and specifically aviation, and he sort of lived intermittently in Paris. So I guess this is one of the times that he was in Paris. And his wife was called Marie Claire with the maiden name Verola. So apparently she was, French maybe. She definitely wasn't Russian. But he doesn't figure a lot in the diaries. I just thought he was an interesting person, so I would fill you in a little bit on the background. So the next person that Dmitri mentions is Prince Michel Murat. He wasn't the Prince Murat yet. He would become that in the 30s when his father passed away. So I don't know. Well, let's see. His Christian name was, even though he went by Michel, his Christian name was Joachim Napoleon Michel Murat. And he'd been a cavalryman in the First World War, so he had that in common with Dmitri, but he'd also been involved with aviation. And he was a close friend of someone who was a friend of Dimitri's. I don't know if you would say a close friend, but Maurice Baring, who was an Englishman that had pre-war connections in Russia. And so Michel Murat is kind of a friend of a friend. And he had really a sterling military record. He was the commander of a fort during the Battle of Verdun and was highly decorated. And at this time in 1921, he was also a member of Parliament. So what would that be in French? A deputy in the Chamber of Deputies, I guess. So he was a serious man. And he and Dmitri are spending some time together. And then they go together to have cocktails with Contessa Martel. Just in the diary entry of yesterday or the day before, Dmitri was referring to her as that repulsive Martel Bardak. But now, I guess, he's actually gone to have cocktails with her, he and Murat. And there are some other people there. So we already know Marta Davelli, we know Antoine de la Sala and Henri Say. In other words, we know that we don't know Henri Say because I don't have any information about him. But her two brothers are there. And her two brothers, I don't know exactly which of the Bardaks they were. The surname is Bardac. There was Comte de Martel, who was one of the brothers of the Contessa de Martel, and his name was Henri, and he was a diplomat. He'd been secretary of the French embassy in Washington, D.C. back before the war, and he was a friend and possibly a lover of Proust's, and Proust once said about him that he was a guinea pig in a pink coat. And so I don't know if this is the brother. Two of her brothers were there. So there was him, but there were also some other Bardaks, and he specifically is mentioned. Oh wait, there's also a Jacques, and there's also a Noël de Bardac, who was a banker. And the Bardaks come into the diaries between 1921 and 1924. All right, so that's that, another interesting person. So they have cocktails, and then Dmitri is invited to have dinner at the Ritz by a certain Sturgis. And this is not the film director Sturgis, this is Sturgis, who was a socialite on the east coast of the U.S., I think New England specifically. His name was Howard. He was about Dimitri's age, and he was a great friend, and I think you could even say crony of Cole Porter's. He sort of seemed to migrate around with Cole Porter and be present at all of these marvelous parties and various things like that. So that's Sturgis, and he too, pops in and out in the diaries. And so they're at dinner at the invitation of Sturgis. There's a woman there. I can't read her name, but she is related to Eileen and Dickie Ward. But so Eileen, I would assume, was the Duchess of Sutherland, because Dmitri had fairly recently been staying with the Sutherlands, the Duke and Duchess of Sutherland, in Scotland. And there he had described Eileen as being a rather unintelligent person, very sweet, but an unintelligent person who only wanted to talk about sports. So that wasn't really, he was a sporty guy, but that wasn't really his cup of tea. And then this Dickie Ward, who's a woman, boy, I just don't know. These ones stress me out because I'm just not, I find it difficult to be motivated to kind of care about yeah, I mean, I shouldn't say that because they were, this sort of social life was very important to Dmitri, and I'm sure there's much to be learned for it, but it's not the thing that really draws me the most. So, let's group source this a little. And if any of you are more up on the social scene in Paris and in London, maybe you can leave some comments and fill me in a bit. Because, I mean, yeah, I do want to know. I just have a hard time getting motivated to do the research. So he mentions that he knows this woman from Scotland. And as I say, he had just recently been there. Okay, but our friend Dmitri, he has such a reputation as having been a playboy and a party animal, and to some extent it was apt, but yeah, not really. I mean, not completely. He really doesn't like this sort of thing, He loves to have little groups, little gatherings with little groups of people that he knows really well and is really comfortable with, and play the guitar and play bridge and do things like that, and he really likes that, and he loves to play the host. But when it comes to groups like this, his most common reaction is to say, well, it was a bore, it was dull, and to get away early if he can. And he sort of, at this stage in his existence in Paris, he sort of has like three things he's really interested in. One is money and how to make it. One is politics, emigre politics, that he's really, really interested in. But even other things like, the strikes that were going on in Europe and the problems in Ireland. And, he's interested in all of that stuff. And the other thing, of course, is golf. And one more thing, he's interested in finding men he can play golf with and women he can jump into bed with. And so this isn't really his cup of tea. So he slips away and goes off to his sisters, and they're doing this. They decide to, they have nothing else to do, I guess. It's a Tuesday evening, so they try to tell their fortunes by pouring wax into hot wax into water. I've never done that. But nothing came of it, Dmitri says. But Mimi Polovtsov was sort of into this kind of thing. And she was involved in seances, and she tried to contact Dmitri and Maria's father, Grand Duke Paul, in a seance. And she claimed that she did contact him, and she told Dmitri about it. And Dmitri really wasn't sure if he should mention it to his sister or not. I don't know if he ever did, but I mean, it was pretty uninteresting. It was just sort of typical of this sort of thing where the person says, oh, don't worry about me, I'm fine, I love you all, and that's about it. So it wasn't like there was any information. So who else do we have? I think we've covered everything. What do we have coming up with the 19th? This girl that he met that is related somehow to Eileen Sutherland, she comes into it, and a big Russian theatrical event in Paris come into it. So that will be the 19th. Then we have the 20th, the 21st, and on 22nd, Coco. So I hope you're interested in that. And I will see you next time. Bye.